Well, good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on NSF's Improving Undergraduate STEM Education, the Education and Human Resources Program. My name is Ellen Carpenter, and I'm a Program Director in the Division of Undergraduate Education at the National Science Foundation, and I'm joined by my colleague.
I'm Andrea Nixon, also a Program Officer with the IUSE program.
And our intent today is to provide an overview of the IUSE program, particularly of the new solicitation, which is NSF 19-601, which was released in September and now allows us to, is now the guiding document that guides the program for the next couple of years. So before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that the session is being recorded. By participating in the session, you are giving your permission to record your questions and comments. And so we will archive those and keep those for our records at the end of the webinar. So question for you as an audience is, what would you like to do to improve STEM education? Would you like to improve your students' performance and retention in STEM courses and majors? Would you like to increase participation of women and students from underrepresented groups in STEM courses and majors? Prepare students to enter the STEM workforce? Increase faculty engagement with STEM teaching? Make your institution a better place for STEM teaching and learning? If your answer is to any of all of those, please stay tuned to learn more about the IUSE EHR program. So we're going to do a couple of things in this webinar. We're going to give you a basic overview of the IUSE EHR program. We're going to give you an opportunity to brainstorm for just a minute to think about what you'd like to do within this program. Some of you may already have ideas that you've been formulating and working on, and some of you may be at the very beginning of your thought process. But we thought we'd give you just a couple of minutes to jot down some ideas or to refresh your mind about the ideas that you already have percolating, and keep those in mind throughout the remainder of the webinar. We'll talk a little bit about the program organization, specifically the tracks and the levels within the program, and our expectation for workshops and conference submissions. We will talk about overall program expectations. We do have some things that we'd like to see from proposals that come into the IUSE program, so we'll expound a little bit on those. We will then talk about the National Science Foundation review criteria, and there are only two of these criteria. They are intellectual merit and broader impacts, and we'll go a little bit more in depth about what exactly those things are and what they might mean to you as you write your proposals for this particular solicitation. We'll provide you with some resources. They will actually be on the slides, and I do want to mention that the slides will be archived by pushing the red resources tab. You should be able to get copies of the slides. So you'll have the ability to access all of the resources that are listed on the slides, as well as to use any of the links that we have embedded in the presentation. If we finish all of that in a reasonable amount of time, we do have some slides set up at the end of the webinar that will discuss those, or might help provide some ideas for those of you that are new to NSF. That will involve detailing exactly what goes into an NSF application and some of the ways in which the application is processed as it's received by NSF. We're also going to include some Q&A sessions, so we'll give you a couple of opportunities to ask questions of us by typing those into the question box on your web page. So we'll have a couple of slides interspersed throughout the webinar that indicate it's time for questions. And we'll try to take, a few of those depending on how much time we have. You're always available, or program officers at NSF are always available for consultation via email or through scheduled phone conversations if for some reason your question doesn't get answered. So feel free to email us or contact us if you have questions that are not answered during the course of this webinar.
Also, on the resources tab, there are some other great things there too. In addition to the slides, you'll see a link to the IUSE EHR web page. You'll see a link to be able to search for prior awards from the program. You'll see registration information for the next webinar that we're going to have that's specific to the institutional and community transformation track, and that will be on the 13th next week. You'll see the solicitation and also slides, our slides, forgive me, and a survey to give us feedback on the webinar.
Okay, so with that, we're going to begin with the introduction to the IUSE EHR program. So we have a couple of things that we hope to achieve through this program. We hope to improve the quality and effectiveness of the education of undergraduates in all STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. We also hope to improve undergraduate STEM teaching and learning for all students and or the institutional environment where they occur. This doesn't mean we're restricting our goals and hopes to just STEM majors, but to all students who are participating in STEM education in their undergraduate years. Anybody can apply for the IUSE program within certain limits. So proposals are accepted from all types of institutions of higher education, as well as from professional societies and organizations that work with or represent those institutions or societies. So our program efforts are geared toward undergraduate students, so the institutions should certainly be involved in undergraduate education in some way, shape, or form, or the professional societies should have undergraduate STEM education as one of their missions. We have funded a variety of different types of institutions over the years that the IUSE program has been in existence. So this indicates the different types of institutions and the level of degrees that have received IUSE funding since the program's inception, which was in 2013. So the largest fraction of our money has gone to public institutions, with other substantial fractions going to private institutions, nonprofit organizations, and a small fraction of our IUSE budget going to business and industry. Again, all of these efforts are focused at undergraduate STEM education, but the entity that receives the funding can be quite varied. The institutions themselves have granted a variety of different types of degrees. Most of the institutions, or a large fraction, are doctoral granting institutions. Some of them are master's granting, some grant only the bachelor's degree, some grant only the associate's degree, and some of them, such as, for example, the professional societies and business and industry, are not degree granting institutions at all. So the question now that I'm going to ask of you is, what exactly do you want to do with your efforts in the IUSE program? And so we're going to give you a couple of minutes here just to brainstorm about what you might have been longing to do to improve undergraduate STEM education at your institution. So this is a chance for those of you who have not really thought about a particular project to have a few minutes to jot down a few ideas and maybe keep those in the forefront of your brain as we go through the rest of this webinar, thinking about how those ideas might interact and intermesh with the objectives of the program. So what we'd like for you to do, for those of you who are new, actually this will be a good series of events. For those of you who have already got an idea in mind, you might take this minute to pull up a copy of your project summary or a copy of the objectives that you have for your particular project and read through and just refresh your memory about what exactly it is you were intending to propose. Anyway, we would like to ask you to write down 3 things you've been wanting to do to improve STEM teaching or learning, to look at those ideas and to try to figure out which one might be most compelling to you and what it might take to implement this idea. Would it take money? Would it take collaborations? Would it take engaging other people in your project? And to try to keep your ideas in mind as a target for an IUSE proposal. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes to do this. I think we'll set our timer for 2 minutes, and we'll be back with you at the end of 2 minutes. Got about 1 more minute to keep thinking. Okay, so let's start winding down this exercise. So hopefully you now have an idea in mind. You've got a set of questions or things you might like to think about, and a really compelling idea that you might like to explore as a potential IUSE proposal. So what are you going to do with this proposal? What I'd like to talk about now a little bit is how our program is organized, and you can think about how you might slot your particular ideas within this organizational structure. The IUSE program has two major tracks. They are engaged student learning and institutional and community and transformation. And so this segment of the webinar will talk about both of those tracks, and we'll talk about the levels of funding within each of the tracks and the deadlines for these different tracks. So as I mentioned, there are two program tracks within the IUSE EHR program. Engaged student learning is focused on the students themselves, on the development, testing, and use of teaching practices and curricular innovations that will engage students and help to improve learning, persistence, and retention in STEM. So this track can focus either directly or indirectly on the students, but student outcomes should perhaps be the main emphasis of projects that come into this particular track. Institutional and community transformation. Do you want to talk about that one, Andrea?
That's focused on ways of scaling up efforts, either within the specific institution, across multiple institutions, or community. Here, community, we're thinking of disciplinary communities. There are multiple ways of defining that. But the institutional and community transformation track, ICT, is focused on those larger scale projects.
Yeah, I should mention that we in the government tend to use a lot of acronyms. So we'll probably be referring to engaged student learning as the ESL track and the institutional and community transformation track as the ICT track. So engaged student learning focuses on improving student learning, either directly or indirectly, and as I mentioned, supports development of improved instructional materials or methods to improve this type of student learning. The track itself aims to engage students, improve their learning, and ultimately to increase retention, persistence, and graduation rates of STEM students. We can envision a range of approaches that might be applicable for this particular track. This list should not be taken as being all-inclusive, but it might be a starting point to think about some ideas about projects that might fit well within this track. For example, developing and implementing novel instructional methods or technologies would certainly be appropriate for the engaged student learning track. Designing and assessing metrics to measure STEM teaching and learning, or adapting ones for use in different contexts, might also be a really interesting type of project in engaged student learning. This track would also support faculty learning through professional development ideas and workshops and other things like that. It can support discipline-based or interdisciplinary educational research. It can support envisioning or adaptation of learning environments for different populations and different types of students or across different types of disciplines. It would support co-curricular activities to increase student motivation and persistence in STEM. It can support analysis on prior work, such as synthesis or meta-analysis of things that have gone before. And it also supports collaborations between 2-year and 4-year institutions to develop innovative pathways for transfer and student success. And again, these are just a set of ideas. These are certainly not meant to be limiting, and there are all kinds of other great ideas that would certainly be appropriate for the engaged student learning track. The target populations for these types of projects are intended to be students at 2-year and 4-year institutions. STEM majors, either declared or in their introductory phases where they're have not yet declared a major. Students whose course of study requires solid skills and knowledge of STEM principles. Quantitative science, data science type of approaches certainly might fall into this. We're also interested in targeting non-STEM majors who are seeking to fulfill a general education requirement in STEM to improve their STEM learning as well. STEM faculty members could be another target for an ESL project through professional development to improve STEM teaching. And we also are interested in targeting pre-service STEM teachers in undergraduate teacher preparation programs, those who are preparing to be STEM teachers at the K-12 level.
The institutional and community transformation track, on the other hand, focuses on improving evidence-based instruction in academic departments, at the institutional level, in other organizations or communities. Earlier I was mentioning disciplinary societies. That would be an example of that. It's designed to support efforts to build and understand systemic change in undergraduate STEM education. And it aims to use appropriate theories of change, I'll talk about more about that in a second, to transform institutions. Just as a reminder, we'll have a second webinar focused on this particular track on the 13th.
Yeah, and there will be, the webinar information is available in the resource tab.
So there are a range of approaches that these are emblematic of them, but they're not limited to these examples, the ICT track. Transformation of high enrollment classes to include evidence-based teaching practices, developing teaching evaluation rubrics rooted in a research-based framework, development of faculty communities to improve accessibility or sustainability of evidence-based practices, identifying best practices to guide institutional transformation, inclusion of non-tenure track faculty or instructors through policy and professional development, or identification of common elements across disciplines, programs, institutions, or systems that support students from underrepresented groups to be successful in STEM.
So these tracks and levels are summarized on this slide right here. Again, we have the two tracks, Engaged Student Learning and Institutional Community Transformation. And within each track, there are a number of different available levels. For example, in the Engaged Student Learning track, again, which focuses on increasing engagement and learning and generating knowledge about student learning, there are 3 different levels. Level 1 will support proposals that ask for up to $300,000 for an award period of up to 3 years. Level 2 would support proposals from the $300,000 to $600,000 range, again for an award period of about 3 years. And Level 3 will support proposals from $600,000 to $2 million for up to 5 years. And it's very important to sort of consider the scale and scope of a project that you might be putting together when you figure out or try to identify which of those levels is appropriate for the work that you're intending to do. Within institutional and community transformation, again, this is the track that is emphasizing scaling up evidence-based practices supported by a theory of change and generating knowledge about the organizational change process. We also have 3 tracks. We have a new track, actually, this time around in our solicitation. This track is a capacity building track, in which case we're trying to encourage institutions that have not yet considered institutional and community transformation work to build capacity and allow them to do so. This track will support proposals for $150,000 for a single institution or up to $300,000 for multiple institutions for up to 2 years, and are essentially intended as sort of a planning phase type of track to get your ideas together, to assemble the team, to assemble the resources that you need in order to develop a successful institutional and community transformation larger scale proposal. Level 1 within this track supports proposals up to $300,000 for an award term of up to 3 years, and Level 2 supports awards from $300,000 to $2 million for single institution awards, or for up to $3 million for projects that include multiple institutions. And this track will support awards that will last up to 5 years. There are different deadlines for the different levels within these tracks. Level 1 and capacity building proposals will have 2 deadlines each year for the foreseeable future. The next deadline for this particular track will be February 4th, 2020, and we intend it to be the first Tuesday in February thereafter. The second deadline will be August 4th, 2020, and the first Tuesday in August thereafter. But we're intending for those deadlines to be in existence for as long as the solicitation is active. Level 2 and Level 3 proposals have a deadline on December 4th, 2019, so coming up in about a month, and we intend the first Tuesday in December thereafter for this deadline, for Level 2 and Level 3. And that's Level 2 and Level 3 in either Engaged Student Learning or Institutional and Community Transformation. The IUSE HR program also supports workshops and conferences. So proposals for workshops and conferences addressing critical challenges in undergraduate STEM education can be submitted to the program at any time. Depending on the size and scale of what's intended in these workshops or conferences, a budget request usually occurs between about $20,000 to $100,000. In order to put in one of these proposals, a proposer must first consult an NSF program officer in the IUSE EHR program to determine the appropriateness of the idea for the workshop or conference for the IUSE EHR program. These conferences are really meant to support a gathering of the minds to focus on critical issues in STEM education. And we hope that some conference and workshop proposals addressing diversity in STEM teaching and learning, and those involving collaborations of educational researchers and disciplinary scientists, will ensure that STEM teaching reflects cutting-edge STEM disciplinary research. And so we're especially encouraging conferences along these two lines, addressing the diversity and addressing incorporating cutting-edge research into contemporary STEM teaching.
If you have questions along the way, I would encourage you to submit them in our webcast interface, and a couple have already come in. The first one is, it relates to the institutional and community transformation track, and it asks, can community transformation include changing parents' attitudes towards STEM? That's a really good question. As we define the institutional and community transformation track, that's not the way that we're interpreting that, but that kind of, the idea behind your question would be welcome in the program. If you look in the IUSE solicitation, which is a description of the program, we have a section on that program overview. And in this, we're talking about efforts to achieve STEM educational goals through innovative partnerships, for example, with community organizations, local, regional, or national industries, centers for teaching and learning, professional societies, or libraries. As is the case with the other examples that we gave, we don't mean them to be exhaustive. So thinking about changing parents' attitudes towards STEM might be a really interesting and innovative approach. So that would be welcome, even though that's not the way in which we're defining community in the institutional and community transformation track.
Okay, there's another question that's asking whether there's a difference in requirements between Engaged Student Learning Level 2 and 3, aside from the funding amount. And again, referring to the solicitation, Engaged Student Learning Level 2 projects are intended to support design and development efforts or impact studies to improve student learning, including department-wide reform efforts, interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary collaborations, or partnerships across institutions. These projects can be from a single institution or involve multi-institutional collaborations. However, in contrast, ESL Level 3 projects that range from $600,000 to $2 million are expected to benefit large numbers of students or broad communities of faculty and instructors through large-scale design and development studies or impact research. Level 3 projects are really expected to demonstrate sufficient scale and scope to warrant this level of support, and should contain highly developed research plans, including significant research questions or large-scale evaluation efforts. So there really is a difference in scale and scope. I think that's the major difference between Level 2 and Level 3. So thinking about the size and scale of the project might help you figure out which of those levels that you might belong in. You can also contact individual program officers and ask for their opinion, and we will certainly do our best to guide you as to which level might be appropriate for your ideas.
You all are submitting fabulous questions. I would also, on the topic of identifying a program officer, starting on page 13 of the solicitation, excuse me, there's a list of program officers by discipline. If your project is focused in one disciplinary area, whether it's computer science or sociology or biology, you can identify specific program officers that might be best in a good position to field your questions. If your questions are interdisciplinary in nature, and by that I mean if, for example, they have 3 or more disciplines represented in a project idea that you have, I would encourage you to contact some interdisciplinary, the program officers listed for interdisciplinary projects. Actually, that would be Corby Hovis. And feel free to contact both Ellen and myself. And we're happy to help route you. I typically field questions that relate to institutional and community transformation projects.
Yeah, so if you've sent a question to one of us, again, if we're not the one who is appropriate to answer it, we're certainly going to be able to find someone who should be able to answer your question.
And those conversations typically start with a one-page summary that you would pull together that addresses typically a very brief description of your project, an articulation that's concise about intellectual merit, and broader impacts as well. All that in a single page.
Okay, we have a lot of questions here, so we're not going to be able to answer everything, but let's see what we can do. Would creating a new STEM major at a four-year college fall under the ICT umbrella?
It could be under the engaged student learning. One way to think about weighing between, that's a fabulous question, between an engaged student learning and institutional and community transformation project is where is the preponderance of the work? If you are developing materials that, for example, would be student-facing, whether it's developing a major as in the question posed, in curricular materials, that is likely an engaged student learning project. It may also incorporate things like faculty development that would be really important. If you are thinking about developing a new major and engaging across your discipline or establishing a discipline, that might be something that would be associated with institutional and community transformation. So that's a good example of something that you might want to check in with a specific program officer about as well, if you have questions along those lines.
Okay, here's another question. It reads, I'm interested in trying to build a community of faculty and undergraduate biology education at other primarily undergraduate institutions to help support education in the classroom and provide opportunities for undergraduate research in STEM disciplines. Does this fit well with the ESL track? And I think in looking at it, it actually would fit very well. It's focused on a single discipline. It's focused on efforts to improve undergraduate learning, and it could incorporate research experiences which have been shown to improve undergraduate identity and STEM identity and to help with their persistence and graduation in STEM degrees.
There's another question. Can you be granted an Engaged Student Learning Track Award and then reapply for an Institutional and Community Transformation Award to scale up the impact? Yes, in fact, you can. You need not have prior funding in the IUSE program to go to submit a proposal for level 2 or level 3, but you are encouraged to have multiple submissions. Individual PIs or co-PIs can be up to 3 proposals in a given fiscal year, which is September 1st through through October 30th. Is that right?
October 1st through September 30th.
Thank you. Thank you.
Almost. Okay, another question asks, previously there was an expectation that proposals would identify the type of educational research, foundational research, early stage exploratory research, etc. Is this still an expectation with the new solicitation? We actually have a paragraph in the new solicitation that addresses this very question, and I'm going to read it. It says, all IUSE EHR projects are expected to increase knowledge about effective STEM education. This may be achieved through posing one or more research questions that will be answered through the course of the study or through evaluation of project activities, impacts, or outcomes. So the answer is you have to figure out how to best justify the generation of new knowledge, whether that's through research or evaluation activities. If it's through research, then consulting the common guidelines, which is actually the document that defines those different types of research, is actually very appropriate and can help in framing your project. If you're going to focus on the project evaluation, you might want to provide an argument as to how evaluation will generate new knowledge and help you achieve the goals of your particular project.
Another question, can engaged student learning proposals involve more than one institution? The answer is yes, definitely yes. And often that is an expectation with level 2 or level 3 proposals. The NSF also accepts collaborative proposals, that is to say a single project through which multiple proposals would be submitted from multiple institutions. So that's a long-winded way of saying yes, multiple institutions can partner in an engaged student learning proposal.
Okay, and here's another question. Do community college faculty and students qualify as recipients or targets of a project services? Absolutely. And
Definitely.
We are very strongly encouraging community colleges to consider coming into the IUSE program, either as the lead institution or as partners with other institutions that aim to improve the education offered in their environments. maybe answer 2 or 3 more, and then we'll move on to the next section.
There was a question about, can the second institution in an institutional and community transformation track proposal be a K through 12 school? There are multiple ways to establish partnerships with K through 12 schools. They may not be a co-submitting institution. I've not seen that. Have you?
No, I have not.
No, but there are multiple ways of incorporating them. The IUSE program calls out specifically, in at least one of our examples, teacher preparation. And quite often those kinds of projects involve partnerships with K through 12 schools. Also, civic engagement projects may involve similar partnerships. So I would encourage you to be in touch with a program officer to think about ways of structuring such a proposal.
Okay, here's a question about equipment purchases, about whether or not they're encouraged or allowed under IUSE grants. They could be if they relate directly to STEM education and are used specifically for educating students. If the purchase is also to further the research objectives of a principal investigator or a group of investigators at the institution and to only allow students as sort of secondary users, then that type of purchase would not be appropriate for an IUSE proposal. There's a question about whether you need to have a level 1 IUSE proposal funded to submit a level 2 proposal, and the answer is no. Your project can certainly come in at any level that is appropriate for the scale and scope of the intended activities. Okay, maybe we should move on.
Yeah.
We realize there are a lot of questions that we're not going to have a chance to answer as part of this webinar, but again, please be aware that you can contact program officers and address those questions directly to program officers. So let's move into a discussion of program expectations. All IUSE proposals are expected to increase knowledge about effective STEM education through one of 2 activities, either posing one or more research questions or through evaluation of project activities, impacts, or outcomes. So successful proposals, we hope, will build on what is known, summarizing usually the published literature and defining a starting point from which to extend the prior work. We hope that successful proposals in general include a well-designed plan to gather data. They specify methods of analysis that will be employed to answer the questions that are posed within the proposal, and they include mechanisms to evaluate the success of the project. And these are typically both formative and summative evaluation mechanisms, allowing project corrections during the course of the project, as well as evaluating the success of the project at its completion. Successful proposals typically explain how findings and materials will be shared with the community at large, or with other investigators who are interested in the work, or with other institutions that could benefit from the type of work that's being done. Proposals should address the sustainability of project efforts for the long term, and that usually means beyond the end of the funding period. And successful proposals will collaborate as needed with other investigators, institutions, or communities in order to ensure the best outcome for the intended activities. In terms of methods of analysis,
it's important to align research or evaluation methods with the questions posed. It's important also to select the appropriate methods to perform the study. They may be qualitative, quantitative, or a mixture of both. Sometimes people think that because we're the National Science Foundation, we're focused really on quantitative data. We really want to make sure that you're posing important evaluation or research questions, and your method of analysis it will enable you to answer those questions effectively.
Okay, now it's time to play a little game. We're going to ask you a couple of questions and see how much information you have retained about the IUSE program. So question 1 is, do all proposals, or true or false, all proposals must have a research component? And the answer is false, that all proposals must generate new knowledge. And so again, that can be defined through having research questions or through appropriate evaluation measures in order to generate that knowledge. Question 2, STEM curriculum development, programmatic pathways, learning resources, assessment instruments, and faculty development may receive funding. The answer is true. Any or all of those things, alone or in combination, are appropriate for funding through the IUSE program. Question 3, proposals may focus on both STEM and non-STEM majors. True or false? True. We appreciate efforts to improve undergraduate STEM education for either majors, non-majors, or both. Question 4, proposals may focus solely on students within a single discipline. That's true. Focus may also be on multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary STEM education, or again, within a single discipline, such as biology, chemistry, physics, etc. An evaluation plan that provides formative and summative assessment of the effectiveness of the project in achieving its goals is required. That is also true. Successful proposals will include both formative and summative assessment to allow demonstration of achievement of project goals. Question 6, proposals should demonstrate a solid grounding in relevant literature on STEM teaching and learning. That is, of course, true. That provides the rationale and the starting point to expand future efforts. Question 7, only colleges and universities may submit proposals. That's false. All categories of proposers that are identified in the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide are eligible, and that includes professional societies, companies, nonprofit organizations, and others of similar ilk. Again, the focus needs to be on undergraduate student education, and as long as those institutions have that focus or a partnership that allows them to achieve that focus, they are appropriate for application to the IUSE program. And here's a couple other points for you. Which of the following can receive IUSE funding? Using and building evidence about improved STEM instructional practices, investigating novel instructional tools or learning systems, including cyber learning approaches, creating, implementing, and testing programmatic curricular, course, and technology-driven models for STEM teaching and learning, developing, implementing, and testing creative approaches for adoption of educational research into disciplinary teaching, developing and validating assessments or metrics for undergraduate STEM learning and instructional practice, and propagating and sustaining transformative and effective STEM teaching and learning through institutional practices or involvement of professional societies. And every one of those would be appropriate for IUSE funding. Okay, so we have another break for questions at this point. So let's see if there's anything else that's come up in the question box that we can answer. Okay, here's a question about external evaluators. The question reads, do we have to use external evaluators who are not otherwise involved in the project, or can this be done by people involved in the project? In the new solicitation, we define evaluation as occurring either by a member of the project team, by an external evaluator, or by an advisory board. So any of those alternatives would be appropriate for inclusion in the project. The main emphasis should be on someone who's qualified to provide the evaluation that's necessary to guide the project activities.
There was another question about the Engaged Student Learning track, which is specifically about generating knowledge about student learning. Should student learning be measured? Can the project focus on generating knowledge about teaching and measuring teaching? Yes, you could focus on either. It's often helpful to, when you're engaging in that kind of measurement, to think about whether or not there are standardized measures that have already been established, that is, whether their validity and reliability have already been established. And that can be incredibly helpful in your designing an efficient project. But it is okay to measure either student learning or focus on generating knowledge about teaching and measuring the efficacy of teaching. All of those are welcome in the program.
Okay, there's another question about including educational specialists from different institutions as part of the research team if the research is primarily focused on student learning, with the educational specialist taking responsibility for pedagogical assessment. That is certainly one approach that can be used, but as we just covered, you can also have members of the project team serve as the assessment expert or the evaluators, as well as an advisory board providing that type of guidance.
Another question was, Would the IUSE program cover efforts to prepare college-bound students for college during the summer before matriculating in undergraduate institutions? The IUSE program has funded efforts that are housed in colleges and universities that have summer bridge programs. So the emphasis really is on undergraduate education, not on K through 12 efforts. But there is some work that spans those boundaries, and I'd encourage you to talk to a program officer to make sure that you're formulating the project in a way that aligns with the IUSE program.
We might want to just take a minute and sort of discuss what an undergraduate really is. And by our sort of informal definition, an undergraduate is a student who is matriculated in an institution of higher education, whether they're intending to come in the fall and the summer bridge is what's the time that's happening before they actually step foot on the campus, or they are part of a degree program at that campus. They have to be matriculated as part of the institution to be considered as an undergraduate. So a summer bridge program, for example, for high school students that aren't expected to go to the institution hosting the summer bridge program would actually not be appropriate for support through the IUSE program. It would have to be for students who are intending to attend the institution that is sponsoring the summer bridge program.
There was a question about within the engaged student learning projects or proposals, can you comment on any differences in expectations of research components between level 1 and level 2? I think that in the solicitation we talk about the scale and scope of the projects as a way of differentiating between the different levels. And a natural way to think about that is how many contexts in which would your project take place? Are you looking across multiple courses, across multiple institutions, and to align your research questions and the context with the context in which your project would take place. So I would think more in terms of right-sizing your project and deciding on the level, and then aligning your research or your evaluation plan so that it aligns with the project proposed.
Okay, here's a question. Faculty professional development and mentor-mentee training is involved. Are we qualified as a single institution that is not a university? It certainly sounds like you would be qualified as a single institution that is not a university. Those two aspects can certainly be considered to contribute to engaged student learning, or under the right circumstances also to institutional and community transformation.
Another question from an institution that intends to convert from lecture-based teaching to studio-based teaching by adopting the material and approach of UNC Chapel Hill. We have no research goals. Are any IUSE tracks appropriate for us? Either of the tracks may be appropriate for you. What we're really interested in seeing is what works for whom and in what context. And you can help generate new knowledge through either a research project or evaluation activities. So in either case, it's important to identify what kinds of data you might gather that would enable you to have a sense of whether or not your project was successful. And as the project is unfolding, how will you know in a formative way? By that I mean, as the project is underway, how can you have data that will inform the choices that you need to make as a project leader?
Okay, here's a question about industry partners. My colleagues and I are considering partnering with colleagues in industry to improve field-based experiential learning in the geosciences. Are there any particular concerns or limitations on having industry partners within the IUSE program? Absolutely not. I mean, industry partners can be very good partners for improving undergraduate STEM education, in particular for the experiential learning of allowing the students to experience what it would be like to be in the workforce in that particular industry. This can be a very viable and very valuable partnership for providing STEM training for future workforce development, and would certainly be appropriate for submission to the IUSE program.
Here's another question. We're developing a face-to-face and online modules that would help STEM students develop communication competencies that are required in science careers. These include working in laboratory teams, communicating results with visual aids, and proposing innovation. These would be integrated into the STEM curriculum so students receive the training just in time when they need it in a given course. Would this be appropriate for the engaged student learning track? Yes, it sounds like it would. and this is a good opportunity to segue that we're interested both in supporting undergraduate STEM educations for majors, for people who are non-majors who are taking STEM courses. So we're both, the fundamental goals are about STEM learning and learning environments, in preparing a future workforce, and a STEM literate citizenry. So engaging in those kinds of activities with students in multiple types of courses would be appropriate for the IUSE program and for the Engaged Student Learning track.
Okay, another question asks, do all proposals require an IRB? At the time of submission, no IRB is required. If a proposal is being selected for an award, the program officer who's negotiating the award will engage with the proposer to have the IRB requested and have the project reviewed at that point in time. So you don't need an IRB approval or review to submit a project to the program.
Is it expected that an educational specialist from a different institution be part of the research team if the research is primarily focused on student learning, the educational specialist taking responsibility for pedagogical assessment? You need not have an educational researcher or an evaluator necessarily from an outside institution. It's important for you as you're putting together a description of your project in your proposal to make a convincing case to the reviewers that you've identified important questions that will either be the basis of your evaluation or your research, that you have a team that has the appropriate level of expertise to carry out the evaluation or the research activities. So they need not be from an outside institution, but you'll want to address issues of impartiality and or connectedness to the project. It's important when you're developing a proposal that the kind of evaluation plan and the research plan that you marshal, one or the other or both, appear to be integrated with the project in a natural way. Sometimes it's challenging if it feels like that they're an add-on after the fact. So in terms of the role of your education specialist or your evaluator or your researcher, make sure that they're part of the team in a meaningful way.
Okay, we are getting a lot of questions on evaluation and the evaluation component. I just want to point out in the solicitation there is a section at the very end of the solicitation called Project Elements. And one of the points in that section addresses project evaluation. So I'm just going to read that section for you briefly, and then you can refer back to the solicitation and look at this if you would like to at your leisure. So project evaluation plan. For all proposals except for ICT capacity building, an appropriate evaluation plan should be included along with project personnel dedicated to evaluation of project activities. The evaluation activities may be conducted by an independent external evaluator, by qualified members of the project team, or guided by a project advisory board. Evaluation activities should be aligned with proposed activities and expected outcomes. So it's going to be up to you to determine what type of evaluation activities you're going to need in your particular project and what the appropriate personnel or level of staffing would be to meet those needs. Should we move on?
Let's do.
Okay. So the next session of the webinar is going to address the NSF merit review criteria. And these are the criteria that are going to be used to assess any proposal that you would submit to any program at NSF with specific reference to proposals that are submitted to the IUSE program. There are two criteria that the National Science Foundation uses. They are intellectual merit and broader impacts. So intellectual merit might be thought of as what is the potential for the proposed activity to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field or across fields. And I kind of like to think of this as what will we learn from the work? That's my sort of nutshell distillation of intellectual merit. Whereas broader impacts is what is the potential for benefiting society or for advancing desired societal outcomes. And my nutshell distillation is why is the work important to society? So again, we are going to use acronyms. We often refer to intellectual merit as IM and broader impacts as BI. So intellectual merit, what are we going to learn? And broader impacts, why is it important to society? Who is it going to affect? So intellectual merit can actually consist of a lot of different things, and there are lots of different elements of this that reviewers will typically use in considering proposals. Intellectual merit can consist of the potential to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field or across fields, the PI and the team's capability in conducting the development and generation of knowledge, the access to the necessary resources to complete the project, including unfunded collaborations to conduct the proposed work, a clear plan for what the project will do, who will do it, when it will be done, and why that particular piece of the project is important, and then a mechanism to assess the success of the proposed project's attempts to advance knowledge and understanding and to provide feedback to both the PI and the team conducting the project. Broader impacts, or who is this going to impact, society-relevant outcomes may include, but are certainly not limited to, a number of points. These include things like full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minorities in STEM, improving STEM education and educator development at any level, increased public scientific literacy and public engagement with science and technology, improved well-being of individuals in society as a result of these activities, the development of a diverse, globally competitive STEM workforce, and this is certainly a strong, broader impact of educational efforts, increased partnership between academia, industry, and others, increasing the impact of the work through spreading it through perhaps non-traditional partners, improved national security, increased economic competitiveness, and enhanced infrastructure for research and education. So all of those aspects might be part of broader impacts. And some projects are going to have some aspects, some will have others. It's certainly not necessary to have all of these points addressed within a single project. The other thing I'd like to mention actually about broader impacts and intellectual merit is that while we expect both of those elements to be in any given proposal, we don't necessarily expect them to be balanced within any given proposal. So you wouldn't necessarily have an equal focus on intellectual merit and on broader impacts. Some proposals will probably have a stronger focus on intellectual merit and maybe a little less emphasis on the broader impacts of the work, while others may be much more focused on the broader impacts and a little bit less on the intellectual merit. This is perfectly fine. One of the things that we as program officers do is we strive to have a balance across our portfolio, but that happens in the recognition that the things are not always going to be evenly balanced within every single proposal or every single award that we make. Other things that reviewers are asked to consider in reviewing the proposals that you submit are things like, to what extent do the proposed activities suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts? We all love new ideas. This is a way to expand the field and move the field forward, and we do ask reviewers to pay attention to the new and creative ideas that are proposed in the things that they're reading. We ask reviewers whether the plan for carrying out the proposed activities is well-reasoned, well-organized, and based on a sound rationale. Does the plan also incorporate a mechanism to assess success? And we've talked a little bit about evaluation efforts that can indicate whether a project is successful. We ask reviewers to consider the qualifications of the individual, the team, or the institution to conduct the proposed activities, and whether or not collaborative partners might be engaged to help with that particular success of the project. We ask whether there are adequate resources available to the PI, either at the home institution or through collaborations, to carry out the proposed activities. And again, it's not necessary that your institution have every piece of the puzzle available to it, as long as you have collaborations in place that will allow you to get all of the pieces of the puzzle across the institutions that you're working with. We also ask reviewers to look at a couple of concrete elements of the proposals. These include things like the facilities, equipment, and other resources, data management plan, postdoctoral research or mentoring plan, and any required supplementary documents to make sure that they are all within reason for the project that's being proposed. I have a little question for you. I'm actually going to provide you with a couple of examples of what might be broader impacts or intellectual merit, and I'd like you to read each example and think for a second if you can figure out whether the example illustrates more strongly broader impacts or more strongly intellectual merit. And again, there may be elements of both within, but just think about which one might be the strongest element here. Okay, so the question is, in addition to development and implementation of a novel curriculum, the project will include educational research to uncover new information about undergraduate model-based reasoning through detailed assessment of classroom learning. So would you guess that this is intellectual merit or broader impact? My feeling is that this is a reflection of the intellectual merit of a particular project. You're going to uncover new information, so that's knowledge generation about a particular aspect of undergraduate education, in this case, model-based reasoning. And so a reviewer might interpret this as a statement supporting the intellectual merit of the proposed project. And then here's another one. Activities planned will provide in-depth faculty development through a national series of workshops and an expansion of an ongoing national study of the effectiveness of this approach for learning about the nature of science. Intellectual merit or broader impact? I'm going to suggest that this is an example of broader impact. And a couple of keywords sort of give that away. The idea of holding a national series of workshops and the expansion of a national study. Both of those would imply fairly broad impact of the proposed project and might support this particular element of the project as contributing to the overall broader impact of the proposed work. Okay, questions on this section? We'll give you a few minutes to type things into the question box, and we'll see if we can answer a few more of them. Okay, here's a question. Can we include training for graduate students to become peer educators for undergraduates? Absolutely. That is a very reasonable request, and we actually see that in lots of different IUSE proposals. Graduate students can be effective educators as they're much closer in age to undergraduate students, and including them in training of undergraduates would be appropriate. The only disclaimer I would make in including the graduate students is the overall focus of the proposal should still be on the undergraduates, even though graduate students may be a major piece of that particular puzzle. Okay. Another question reads, if part of a project involves introducing STEM into non-STEM courses, would that be appropriate to consider in the assessment of the project? I would certainly think it would be. I mean, you want to assess the STEM learning, and you could assess the engagement and persistence of the students in the non-STEM courses. This may be an example where you might have to do a little bit more qualitative analysis rather than quantitative measurement, particularly if the STEM topic is incorporated into a humanities discipline, for example. Looking at grades in a humanities course will certainly tell you how many students passed, but it won't tell you how many students learned any of the STEM concepts that were introduced. So examining more directly what the STEM content is, either through assessment instruments or through other sort of more qualitative measures of achievement, might demonstrate how that STEM learning has improved in that particular course. Although you can also certainly point to overall improvement in student persistence, perhaps as being related to introducing STEM concepts into that course.
Another question was, my understanding is that first-generation college students, that is to say students who do not have family members who have gone to college at the time that the student is matriculating, are also represented. Does helping these students count as broader impact? Yes. It's important, in terms of broader impact, we encourage you to think about that along multiple dimensions. It could be in terms of characteristics that relate to race and ethnicity. It could be populations of students in rural environments or urban environments, that we really define that quite broadly. And it's helpful as you're articulating what your arguments are for broader impacts to give a sense of the communities that you would be serving and how that relates to your institutional goals or to a broader national need.
Okay. We have many, many questions here.
Yeah. Here's another one about broader impacts. In most of my research-based NSF proposals, they include a separate plan to address broader impact goals. This often includes public outreach, for example, K through 12 students. Is it a good idea to include a component of public outreach, since this will not necessarily involve undergraduate education, although it could? I encourage you to think broadly about the kind of individuals or communities that you would contact and build that into your dissemination plan. If you see that the findings of your proposed work have implications in terms of K through 12, in terms of broader community, in addition to STEM educators, your work may involve people who are mentoring undergraduate students. So broader impacts can relate, are typically very project specific, and it's important, it can be important to go beyond traditional articles in peer-reviewed journals, although we encourage you certainly to engage in that work as well.
Okay. Here's a question about finding others from other institutions to work with. Question is, I work with a team of program evaluators and STEM education researchers in a school of education. We are looking to support more IUSE projects as they are tightly aligned with our mission. Are there recommendations for how to connect with PIs developing projects from other institutions? I think the first suggestion that I would make is to consult the NSF Awards database and look for IUSE projects along lines that your faculty would be interested in. On our resource page, we're actually including a link to the NSF Awards search. So you can go into that page, type in your search terms, and you can also type in IUSE or the solicitation number and see proposals that have come directly in response to the solicitation. I will say I would not type in the current solicitation number because we're just starting the new solicitation. So NSF 19-601 won't have a whole lot of proposals submitted to it yet. But our prior NSF solicitation, NSF 19-540, would in fact, or 590, 17-590, sorry, 17-590, would in fact have a number of proposals associated with it, or a number of awards. So you can see that those are projects that are up and running, and you can get contact information for the PI team affiliated with those projects directly from the website, and then make your contacts as needed. Other options might be to attend education research meetings or discipline-based education research type of interactions, or even to come to the IUSE PI meetings that are hosted through the NSF and AAAS every couple of years.
And in the past year, in the abstracts, the phrases describing our tracks are now present in all of the abstracts. So by that I mean putting in double quotations, engaged student learning, or in double quotations, institutional and community transformation. That will pull up the awards for each of those tracks in the prior year.
Okay. Question, if selected for an award submitted by the December 4th deadline, what is the timeline for award notification? NSF's standard operating procedure is that we expect to take about 6 months to review proposals and to reach decisions on awards, and with probably an additional couple of weeks to actually negotiate and go through the mechanics of issuing the award at the end of that 6-month period. So 6 months is the standard period for expecting the reviews for your proposals to be returned to you.
Another question, does at least one member of the research team need to have had a prior NSF award? The answer to that is no. You could have funding from other agencies. You could be new to work as a principal investigator or co-principal investigator. What's important to address thoroughly in your proposal is the expertise and the resources that you have to carry out the project, the proposed work effectively. Another thing that is helpful is to identify perhaps members of an advisory board. Those may be individuals that have expertise in the subject matter that you're focused in on, methodological expertise, or they may be senior researchers as well. So if you are new to grant funding, those might be helpful strategies to think about.
Okay, here's a question about preliminary data. How might one determine if learning has increased if there is very little or no pre-curriculum change data? That's actually a very interesting question, and that can be built into your project almost. You might, in the course of doing your project, propose collection of some of this pre-curriculum change with the idea of looking at what happens before you implement an intervention and then looking again at what happens after you implement an intervention. So in the 3-year span of a project, it might be possible to look at a pre-curricular change the curriculum, and run it maybe 1 or 2 years and collect data after the curriculum change to see if the effect can be determined.
Another question, in order to outline the qualifications of someone who would be doing assessment on a proposal or a project, could a letter of support be appropriate? Our read on the solicitation is that letters of support of this type are not included with that proposal. I'm really glad you asked that. There's an important distinction between letter of support, which can be a letter that expresses a degree of enthusiasm, versus letters of a collaboration. That is, a commitment to carry out duties enumerated within the proposal. So letters of collaboration would be appropriate from if you have an outside evaluator, as well as a biosketch that would identify the level of expertise that the outside evaluator would bring to the project.
Okay, are we ready to move on maybe?
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're going to go back into the slides. Okay, as we mentioned, there are a number of resources that we think might be helpful in crafting your proposal and in identifying perhaps methods of evaluation or other things that you might be interested in using as you conduct your project. There are publications issued by the NSF which address both proposal structure and the merit review process, and these include things like the Proposal and Awards Policies and Procedures Guide, fondly referred to in NSF halls as the PAPG. So this is the document that provides you with all of the instructions on how to prepare a proposal, all of the different elements of the proposal, and again, some information on award management and other aspects of receiving an award and how it's handled after the award is made. This guide is actually updated on a yearly basis, so always make sure that you're looking at the current version. I think the current one right now is 19-1, and we expect to release a new version probably in January of 2020, and that will be 20-1. It's always the first publication in NSF's roster, so it receives the #1 designation for the given fiscal year. Another helpful resource is the Common Guidelines for Education Research and Development. And we had a question about specifying the different types of research. This Common Guidelines document spells out, I think, very nicely and very cleanly the different types of educational research that it envisioned as being possible. And so you can read through that and see the types of research and see how your project might fit into one of those different types if you'd like to use that as a framework for developing your ideas. We have some resources that look at merit review. There is an overview page, and there is also a video that you can look at that we show to all of our prospective reviewers to help them understand the review process, the pieces of the review, looking at the intellectual merit and the broader impact, and doing things like being aware of implicit bias and other factors that might affect how a review is made by a given reviewer. There is another solicitation that comes out of the Education Human Resources Directorate, and this is the NSF Building Capacity in STEM Education Research, the BICSR solicitation. The information for that is also given on the resource page. And that's a very basic research program that perhaps Andrea wants to talk a little bit more about.
Sure. I mean, that is a program that's incredibly helpful in the sense that it's intended to help people in our communities that are PIs to further develop their methodological background. So if you're interested in engaging in either evaluation or research and you would like to retool, you can either apply for an individual BICSR award, submit a proposal for that, or if you're interested in offering institutes that are designed to build capacity. So, for example, in quasi-experimental design. So the BICSR program is really designed to help us all keep up to date in terms of our research and evaluation skills.
Okay, I think we actually missed a slide here. Yes, there was a slide that I meant to show, which is this slide right here, which indicates resources that are specific to the IUSE EHR program. And as mentioned, these can be accessed through the red resources tab that's available to people who are listening to and viewing this webinar. Those resources include the program webpage, which gives overview information about the program and also provides useful information about upcoming webinars. It also has the contact information for all of the program officers associated with the program right there front and center on this particular page. The IUSE program solicitation is the guiding document for what we expect in the IUSE program in its current iteration. So the current solicitation is NSF 19-601, which was released in the middle of September, and it now governs IUSE submissions for the next couple of years. So it's also available on the resources page, or the URL is given on this slide as well. For people who are interested in prior awards, prior things that have been funded through the IUSE program, the best way to find out about them is to use the award search function of the NSF homepage, and to identify awards, again, using the search methodology that Andrea briefly outlined, to go in and find things that relate to the work that you're doing, or perhaps to find potential collaborators or other folks of interest who might be willing to help you out as you craft your project. And again, program officers at NSF are also a resource. We are willing and available to talk to any one of you about your project ideas and to help guide you either to find the appropriate relevant expertise or to help figure out what part of the IUSE program your project might best fit into. Usually the best way to approach a program officer is first by email, with the expectation you might want to send a one-page outline of the ideas that you have for your particular project to the program officer. And again, you can identify program officers by discipline and interest on the IUSE program webpage. If you can't find anybody that you really think matches exactly the type of project you're trying to do, you're certainly welcome to send your one-page outline either to Andrea or to myself, and we will read through it and either respond back to you directly or direct you to a program officer who has the appropriate expertise to help answer your questions. Okay. At this point, I want to thank everyone for participating in the webinar and certainly for your interest in improving undergraduate STEM education. We do have one more piece of this webinar, but it's primarily geared for those who are new to the NSF application process. For those of you who have prepared and submitted proposals in the past, I would expect that much of the information we're going to be presenting in the next few slides is going to be probably very familiar to you. And so at this point, I'm basically giving you an option to opt out. You're welcome to jump out of the webinar. I would like to ask, if you're going to leave the webinar at this point, that you please visit the resource page and look at the event survey and fill out and complete the survey form that will gather information about your impressions of this particular webinar. We certainly use that type of information to improve our webinars in the future and to provide you with information that you would find helpful as you prepare programs or as you prepare proposals for submission to the IUSE program. Again, thanks very much for listening, and if you're new to NSF, please stay tuned, so we'll move into the next component of the webinar about the actual proposal preparation process. Okay, for those of you who are new to NSF, welcome to the fold. We're glad to have you here and very glad that you're listening to this webinar to help get some information about preparing a proposal. This section will talk about the different proposal components, some ideas for what might make a compelling proposal, how to submit your proposal, and what actually happens to your proposal when it disappears into the black box of NSF. Proposals can be really daunting. They actually have a number of different components, all of which are required elements of the proposal. This is a list of what is required as you are going to prepare and submit a proposal. There is a cover page, which is simply a form that you'll fill out as you prepare your proposal online. A table of contents is generated. There is a project summary, which is a one-page description of your project, including specific statements on intellectual merit and broader impacts. There's the project description, which is essentially the meat of your idea, your chance in 15 pages to describe exactly the project that you're going to do, the personnel team that's involved, your evaluation efforts, and expected outcomes. There's a section for references cited. You'll need to insert biographical sketches for all of the PIs, co-PIs, and senior personnel on the project. You'll need to provide a budget and a budget justification. This is divided into individual years of the project with a cumulative budget reflecting the entire project award period. The justification should include rationale for all of the different budget categories for which you are requesting funds. We ask that you provide statements of current and pending support for all investigators or all PIs and co-PIs on the project, and I think senior personnel as well, to provide current and pending support statements for all of those individuals. There is a facilities, equipment, and other resources page to document the resources available at your institution. There is special information and supplementary documentation insertions. There is a data management plan form. There's a postdoctoral mentoring plan form for those projects that would include postdoctoral fellows, and there are various single copy documents, including things like the collaborators and other affiliations information, which is used in assigning reviewers to your proposal, just to make sure that we don't run into conflicts of interest. The project summary is actually a really important component of your proposal. This is the one-page summary of what you're going to do. So each proposal must contain this one-page summary of the proposed project. And the summary has to include an overview of the project, and that's usually the top section of the project summary, and then individual statements on intellectual merit and broader impacts. And these statements must be labeled as intellectual merit and broader impacts. So you're basically going to have three sections to this document: your project overview, your intellectual merit statement, and your broader impact statement. In this project summary, this is the time to be very succinct and concise about describing your project. This is the statement that we at NSF will actually use to help assign your project to the correct review panel. So a good, solid description of your project is very helpful in being able to assign that project to the review panel that will be most appropriate to reviewing its ideas. The project description is a chance to expand on your ideas and to provide within the 15-page limit all of the information that's necessary to understand your proposed project. Within this section, you also have to have a section labeled intellectual merit. The project description as a whole must provide a clear statement of the work to be undertaken. It should include the objectives for the period of the proposed work and the expected significance of that work. It should indicate the relationship of the work to the present state of knowledge in the field, as well as to work in progress by the PI and others associated with the project. In general, it should outline the plan of work, including the design of activities to be undertaken, and where appropriate, should provide clear description of experimental methods and procedures. If you're using control groups, for example, what kind of students would be in your control group versus your experimental group? How are you going to gather the data? All of the information that are necessary to understand how the project will actually be conducted as you are doing it. The project description should address what you want to do, why you want to do it, how you plan to do it, how you will know if you succeed, and what benefits could accrue if the project is successful. And again, these relate very strongly to intellectual merit criteria, wanting to know exactly all of the elements of the project and how they contribute to the merit of the project. So the project activities may be based on previously established or innovative methods and approaches, but in either case must be well justified. So this is basically telling you don't necessarily need to have good preliminary data to put in a project, but you can have a good idea about innovative methods and approaches and be able to justify that perhaps through a literature-based justification as opposed to having preliminary data that you've gathered from your own students. The issues about innovative methods and approaches and previous establishment apply both to the technical aspects of the project, of the proposal, and the way in which the project may make broader contributions. Within the project description, we also expect a section labeled broader impacts. So this is, again, your chance to identify the overall broader impacts of the project. And this should provide a discussion of the broader impacts of the proposed activities of the proposal and how they will be obtained through project activities. And in very small type, I note that broader impacts may be accomplished through the research itself, through the activities that are directly related to the specific research project, or through activities that are supported by but complementary to the project. So again, these are different ways in which you can note the broader impacts of the overall project. NSF values the advancement of scientific knowledge and activities that contribute to the achievement of societally relevant outcomes. Such outcomes include, but are not limited to, full participation of women and people from underrepresented groups, persons with disabilities, improved STEM education development at any level, increased public scientific literacy and public engagement with science and technology, improved well-being of individuals in society, development of a diverse, globally competitive STEM workforce, increased partnerships between academia, industry, and others, improved national security, increased economic competitiveness of the U.S., and enhanced infrastructure for research and education. So again, this is a very broad litany of things that can be contained within the heading of broader impacts. Your project description should be concise and it should be detailed all at the same time. Brevity will assist both reviewers and the foundation staff in dealing effectively with your proposals. So you are not allowed to exceed 15 pages. You should include within your project description any results that you have from prior NSF support, not necessarily from the IUSE program, but from other NSF awards that you've had within the recent past. I think that's usually defined as about the last 5 years prior to the current submission. Any visual materials that you include have to be included within that 15-page limitation. And the project description itself must be self-contained. URLs must not be used because they're actually not live in the version that you will end up uploading into the NSF website. And you may not use appendix materials to supplant the page limitation. So you can't, for example, refer to additional documentation for a piece of your project as part of the appendix. Within that 15-page project description, we expect that there be included an assessment and evaluation plan. And this should include some form of evaluator. Again, that can be a member of the project team, it can be an external evaluator, or it can be a project advisory board. It should include some expected outcomes, the instruments that one will use to measure those particular outcomes, analysis of the data leading to determination of the success of the measures, and control experiments or control populations that one might compare the data to determine whether there was actually an effect of the project activities. Just a brief word on the difference between formative and summative evaluation. We've talked a little bit about this throughout the extent of the webinar, but this is a slide that I like to use because I think it very nicely illustrates the difference between what these two types of evaluation are. Formative evaluation might be when the chef tastes the soup. So when you're going through and, it's not the final product yet. You have a chance to add different elements or different ingredients to make the soup a little bit more tasty. So you taste it as you're progressing through the cooking process. The summative evaluation is akin to when the guests taste the soup. At this point, you're not going to rush the soup back in the kitchen to correct the salt or add a different ingredient. This is the final product. So formative allows you chances to correct your course as you're going through the performing the project, whereas summative is the end result. So there are a number of things that can help make your proposal competitive, and this is certainly not a limited list or an all-inclusive list, but this might be some ideas to think about as you're writing a proposal. Using original ideas, having a succinct and focused project plan, including a realistic amount of work, providing sufficient detail that reviewers and NSF staff can understand your project, illustrating cost effectiveness of the proposed activities, high impact of the activities, the knowledge and experience of the PIs that would lead to the success of the project, the contribution of the project to the field, the rationale and evidence of potential effectiveness of the project, the likelihood that the project can be sustained after the project period, and the inclusion of objective feedback or a solid evaluation plan or advisory board for the project. In preparing a competitive proposal, it helps to start with a good idea, and we gave you a couple of minutes at the beginning of this workshop to start putting down some ideas, so hopefully you've already got a good one brewing. You want to be able to communicate that idea clearly. You want to address the two merit review criteria, intellectual merit and broader impacts. You want to be able to state your research objectives and questions, as well as your plans for evaluation of project activities. You want to have good, solid plans for carrying out the proposed work. And you want to ground your project in a good background, a good literature background, or perhaps prior work that you have done. Sometimes this can be even outside of STEM education. There are lots of different places to gather this appropriate background, and it's going to be up to you to determine which is the most appropriate background for your project. You want to have appropriate expertise as part of your project team, and I think a critical element is to ask colleagues in and out of your field to read and critique your proposal before you submit it to the NSF. You should include strong arguments for the importance of the problem. Make sure that the STEM content is clearly articulated, including specific examples of the type of content that might be included in your project. Making sure the research design and the methodology are appropriate and sufficiently discussed, and that there's a sensible chain of reasoning linking the literature, your process for development, the questions that you're asking, the data that you're collecting, and the analysis that you'll perform on that data. And again, the impacts of research and development addressed within the project description. A couple of tips for success. Start early. Right now, you've got about a month before the next deadline. Hopefully, if you write really quickly and are very, very organized, you might have a chance to get yourself together for that one. Please read the program solicitation before you start writing so you understand the goals of the IUSE program. Consult the PAPG as necessary for proposal preparations and instructions. Test drive our interface, which is Fastlane, for proposal submission to make sure you can get on and to make sure you have all of the necessary information. And that includes having an Office of Sponsored Programs that has authority to press the submit button. You individual investigators actually would not submit the application on your own. It has to be submitted through an authorized individual at your organization. Make sure your sponsored research office knows your project is coming to them and that they're ready for it and ready for the submission. Be sure to follow page and font size limits. It helps to be aware of other projects and advances in the field, and again, you should be able to gather a lot of that through your literature review as you're writing your project description. Provide relevant details. Make sure that your reviewers can understand exactly what it is you're going to be doing. Discuss your prior results if you have them, or the literature basis if you don't, and include an evaluation plan with timelines and benchmarks for different pieces of the project. You want to think about what the reviewers are going to see when they're reading your proposal. Put yourself in their place and make sure that all of the information that they need to understand your project is contained within the application itself. If you are revising a project that you've submitted to a prior competition, I would suggest considering the reviewers' comments that were made on the prior submission. Make sure you have someone else read the proposal and do spell check and grammar check to make sure everything's the way it should be and the way you expect it to be. Meet project deadlines or meet submission deadlines. Under very limited circumstances, we will accept late applications, and that's usually fire, flood, famine, hurricane, tornadoes, earthquakes, and other natural disasters. Ignoring the deadline is at your own peril. Follow NSF requirements for proposals involving human subjects. Again, you don't have to have an IRB review prior to making an award or prior to submitting the proposal, but you would have to have one done if you are going to be receiving an award. And call or email NSF program officers for guidance as needed. We're definitely here to help. Proposals must be submitted electronically through Fastlane, that's the preferred method, or through grants.gov. We highly recommend submission through Fastlane. This is the NSF portal, and it will include all of the relevant pieces of your proposal. You can submit through grants.gov, but you have to make sure, the burden is actually on you to make sure all of the correct pieces of the proposal have been submitted. We have special things in Fastlane, like a project data form, that become automatically linked to your proposal that don't appear in grants.gov. So if you have any choice, I really would suggest using Fastlane for your submission. Just a brief overview of what happens to the proposal once it arrives at NSF. Prior to your submitting the proposal, the staff at NSF designs and writes the program solicitation. So as I mentioned, the new solicitation for the IUSE program was just released in September, so that opportunity was announced in September. The opportunity is released at least 90 days before the first deadline. So we released it 90 days before the December 4th deadline. During that 90-day window, you'll have a chance to read through the solicitation, write and submit your proposal, and it's received at NSF by the deadline. Once it's received at NSF, it goes through the review and processing phase, in which its reviewers are selected. The proposal is assigned to an appropriate panel that contains the right reviewers with the right expertise to review your particular proposal. The panel meets either virtually or in a face-to-face setting to discuss a number of proposals, including yours. Each panel member will write an individual review of your proposal, and then for proposals that are actually discussed by the panel, a panel summary is also prepared. And you'll have access to all of that information. It's provided back to you through Fastlane once those reviews are input into Fastlane and decisions are made on the proposals. Program officers take into consideration the reviews that are offered and the discussion that has occurred in the panels of all the proposals in making their recommendations. And once they make a recommendation, that recommendation either to fund the proposal or to decline it for this particular competition is forwarded to our division director for his or her review and approval. If an award is recommended, once the division director has concurred that the award is appropriate, there is a business review of the institution to ensure that it has the financial capability of handling federal funds, that it has the right tracking mechanisms and code assignments to to figure out where the money is being spent. The award is finalized and it is issued to the institution, and you can start work on your project. The whole thing takes about 6 months from step 1 through step 7, with perhaps an additional 30 days or so for the business review and finalizing the awards, just to make sure that everything's in order and all the documentation is in place. And so that, in a nutshell, is what happens when your proposal comes to NSF. And we hope that you were very successful in writing these proposals. We certainly enjoy reading your very creative, novel, and interesting ideas. It's always a lot of fun to serve as a program officer in this program because the community has such great ideas and some really strong efforts at improving undergraduate STEM education. So, any questions on proposal preparation in the last minute? Again, we will provide copies of these slides on the resource page, and there are plenty of resources available through NSF general sources, as well as contacting program officers for specific questions. And we thank you for your interest in improving undergraduate STEM education.